studies programs now see the need to include as many aspects of cultural production for a more complete picture of the way in which people have expressed themselves. So let us concentrate our focus on the Aboriginal traditions. Uh, the tradition of Aborigines has a very strong influence, has a very strong presence in Australian literature. In the article White on Black and Black on Black, uh, Adam Shoemaker argues that the major problem in any attempt to search for literary beginnings in Australian culture, which is which includes Aboriginal writing, the question of whether we adapt the traditional parameters of literature, being primarily quote unquote poetry, drama, and verse, or consider black Australian writings to encompass any meaningful inscriptions, petitions in any medium, diaries, letters, songs, lyrics, transcribed oral narratives, message sticks, sermons, carvings, rock art, body markings, drawings, speeches, articles, and submissions. Cool. So all these things are has a very have a very strong presence in Australian literature, and he also recommends the letter more of open definition, the more open speeches, articles, and submissions. The point, however, remains that the framework reviews steps and conditions of nature of the product. In the case of Aboriginal culture and literature, the models of reference have most often been imposed from outside, imported from foreign countries. Shoemaker says, quote, the historical dates which constitute what is known as the chronological time have been used to imprison Australia's indigenous people. Terms such as prehistory and pre-literary carry with them the strongest possible sense of a time before and a time after. Of course, these dividing lines have been imposed retrospectively upon Black Australians by those who are not members of the culture. Such arbitrary demarcations also imply that the past begins when it is recorded in a legible script, not when human beings began to commit stories to memory. What cannot be ignored is the fact that scores of Aboriginal verbal artists have told and retold tales which defy datable chronology. Instead of joining the tyrannical quest for the earliest poem or the past letter in English, Shoemaker states the need to explore the signposts of old indigenous Australian literature. Um, Woodrow Norogwin, in writing from the Prince, in his book Writing from the Prince, argues that the importance of this oral tradition lies also in the fact that, quote unquote, it describes Aboriginal lifestyles before the invasion. To put this tradition into a framework that may be more easy to understand for Western thinking, Woodrow adds the surviving fragments of this tradition are important to Aborigines and others as a classical literature. In future, it may serve as the basis of the written literature. They are as important to the Aborigines as the Iliad is to the Europeans. So there is a big comparison between the Aboriginal literature and the Iliad of Homer and the classical nature of Aboriginal literature in Australia has to be taken into cognizance. In a later edition of this book, Indigenous Literature of Australia, Millie Wonka also points out the importance of these oral records in reconstructing Aboriginal history. Epics such as uh, Triangle from Emhen Land and Vati Kadijara epic, for example, reveal how Aboriginal communities who came to the land became its inhabitants, completely disapproved the terra knowledge of opposition. Quote, let us rest on our pedals, brother. Let us rest, for I am tired. What is happening there, brother? My body aches with tiredness. I worry because of our sacred emblems. I am tired because we threw them away. Now we are close to the shore. Now our journey, our paddling is over. We land on the beach at Port Bradsa. That is our country. Plant our flag here. We have arrived. Oh, brother. So this thinking tells us about the importance of aborigines and how the colonial influence has made such aboriginal traditions a kind of um, complete disarray. And when the colonial tradition came, the oral traditions were neglected and they and then we find a um, 150 tradition instead of this colonial tradition. The ballads created by the convict community made a vibrant and colorful oral literature that captured the group's response to the natural and social environment of the penal system in Australia. The genre was a natural continuation of the folk ballads and narratives that the lower social classes of the British society and those of the Irish descent produced in the colonial centre. Edgar Waters in the ballads and popular verse traces them back to the broadside ballads of the metropolitan centre. Uh, Life within the penal system provided the things that were dealt with those these oral prices. Ian Turner elaborates. The ballads of the convicts express their situation. At first, the sentiment was nostalgic, and sometimes more repentant, with an ironic acceptance of the moralizing of the judges and bowlers. Later, say by the 1820s, although it is impossible to date the ballads precisely, the nostalgia disappeared, and the spirit was hatred and defiance of the authorities, fear or bravado for the brutalities of the system, admiration for those who dogged it notably, the successful escapes, and a bitter humor which set out to subvert the um, unwanted values of their betters. And then we come to approach the Bush tradition. The Bush fraternity of Australia was a loose nomadic community that reached its creative peak in the 30 years of the post-Gold Rush outback boom. It inherited something of the pre-gold tradition as well, Hogg Anderson quotes a 1923 issue of the North Queensland Register, which says that almost every cattle run had generally someone who could turn out Bush jingle of a sort. Some of these verses were remarkably good, and it has to be regretted that most of them are now forgotten. Anderson, who quotes Edward Sorensen, who had spent his life in a variety of bush occupations and contributed regularly to the bulletin, Sorensen felt that the isolation of life in the outback was responsible for the popularity and spread of this forceful tradition. With nobody to talk to and seldom anything to read, the solitary bloke either yarns to himself or turns to writing. Very often he does both. Um, the colonial traditions of ballads and blues songs may have had a strong anti-establishment tone at the original time of their creation and popularity. However, with the time and change of social environments in the late 19th and early 20th century, these very pieces and the characters they immortalized become very much a part of the establishment, a sense of cultural identity. Even early colonial writers such as Alan Lindsay, Gordon, Benjo Patterson, and Henry Lawson drew on these traditions in their verse and prose writing. The Bulletin School of Writing started in the 1880s, saw the bush and its cultural creations as an ideal source to tap in the literary creation of a characteristically Australian identity. Ian Turner writes of the output of this ballad community. It was an eclectic as to sources. It drew its melodies from the popular songs of the drawing room or music hall, or from folk song, commonly Irish, and created its text by parodying or by rewriting the more literary productions of the homestead, or by the creation of rough verses of its own. Its language was, however, all its own, colorful and not uncommonly lucid. It had two kinds of heroes: the bush ranger, whom it revered, and the fast bushman, whom it cut down size. Its characteristic attitudes, as evidenced in its yarn as well as its ballads, were admiration for daring and resourcefulness, dislike for the law, and squatter at contempt for the cocky farmer, the new charm, and the colorful races, a blossom not unmixed with wry self-recognition, and a sardonic spitting in the eye of fate. This was a living, unlettered popularity, popularly created literature, the last in Australian history, and it was of considerable importance because so much of its spirit, even its language and style, was passed into formal literary expression in the 1890s. So then we come to approach the early literature, um, where we see um, the colonial writing, then we have the women's writing, and then Aboriginal writing, and so on. So when we come to colonial writing, we are very much aware that the colonial influence has created a kind of problem in Australian literature where the journals, diaries, and letters of early voyagers, explorers, and settlers were the first pieces of writing to be inspired by European contact with the Australian continent. So here what happens is the earlier it was in the oral form, the folk tales and colored forms. And when the colonial people came, they wrote diaries and letters and the explorers and the settlers have written their accounts, um, which had a predominantly European accent, has influenced the Australian continent in a very impactful way. Of these documents of initial contact, according to Dale's Bird, the accounts of William Dampier, published as a new voyage around the world in 1689, and James Cook, which respectively provided a picture of the land as degraded and barren, and offering a fertile future. Um, and then what happens here is the um Macmillan Anthology records a kind of tension that we encountered when colonial influence came to Australia. So, quote, I would like to quote that passage. Quote, the weather being clear gave us a good view of the country, which has a very pleasing appearance. It is of a moderate height, diversified by hills and valleys, ridges and plains, interspersed with a few lawns of no great extent, but in general covered with wood. The accent of the hills and ridges is gentle, and the summits are not high. We continued to sail along the shore to the northward with a southerly wind, and in the afternoon we saw smoke in several places, by which we knew the country to be inhabited. Um, David Bond's earliest play, The Bush Rangers, is based on the exploits of Matthew Brady, a notorious leader of a bush ranging gang of escaped convicts. It aims, its aim was not so much to glamorize bush ranging but to expose the governor's oppression of um, three settlers, such as Vaughan, in a captain's lament on the death of Captain Logan. Um, and we can quote that line which beautifully describes this dilemma and agony of a convict's life. Quote, our overseers and superintendents, these tyrants' orders we must obey, or else at the triangles our flesh is mangled. Such are our wages at Morton Bay. So this tells us how operation by the colonials has created a kind of havoc within the um, colonial Australian community, and literature was bound to reflect such a kind of operation. And now we'll come to analyze the women's writing, how women came into picture for the first time in Australian literature, and one Catherine Spence, who migrated with her family from Scotland to South Australia, um, she has created a body of literature in Australia, and Jane Austen was a strong influence on her literary output. She was very much influenced by Jane Austen. Her novels dealt with the problems of white female immigration. Uh, she thus has a distinction of being the first women novelist to write about Australia. and the first to deal with women's problems. Her first novel, Clara Morrison, A Tale of South Australia during the gold fever, discusses from a women's perspective the social, financial, and moral issues of the time in Adelaide. Um the male writers of this period showed an inclination to portray a man as heroic, hardworking, and thus responsible for Australia's growth and development. The women were, as a result, um, often depicted as subordinate, weak, and dependent upon the men for protection and their livelihood. So we'll continue discussion in the next class. Perhaps the next class is on, and so we have to stop here. See you in the next class. Thank you.
Good evening. So we start with uh, Unit 17, and this is Block 5. Block 5, the English patient, that is what we are going to study. So in the upcoming times, we'll be finishing with Unit 17 and 18, at least today. And then we continue with Unit 19 and 20. So Unit 17 talks about the Canadian South Asian diasporic writing, where we will discuss about the introduction. We'll talk about the diasporas in general. We'll talk about a brief introduction. We'll also discuss about diasporic criticism, and then some question answers we will be discussing in Unit 17. Now, why we need to study this Unit 17 on Canadian South Asian diasporic writing? It's important to introduce all of you to what is meant by the term diaspora, and we will also study the a short glimpse of Canadian South Asian diasporic writing in general. So let's begin. Um, Canada has a rich and diverse South Asian diasporic literary tradition. We have writers like M.G. Vasanji, Rohinton Mistry, and Anita Rao Badami, who have made significant contributions to Canadian literature with their unique perspectives and narratives rooted in the South Asian immigrant experience. Canadian South Asian diasporic writing often explores themes of migration, identity belonging, cultural hybridity, and intergenerational conflict. Now, the authors, the names that I just spoke out, for example, M.G. Vasanji, who has written the Book of Secrets, Rohinton Mistry, who has written A Fine Balance, and there are also authors like Anita Rao Badami, who has written The Turmeric Mem, depict the struggles and triumphs of South Asian immigrants in Canada. Just give me a second. Okay. So, Anita Rao Badami, who has written the Tamarind Mem, depict the struggles and triumphs of South Asian immigrants in Canada. So, we talk about Michael Ondatse and Rainy Cruz, who are the notable Sri Lankan Canadian writers, while Rohinton Mistry and Uma Parmeshwaram are also important Indian Canadian diasporic voices. Michael Ondatse, who has written The English Patient, Running in the Family, blends history, memory, and identity, often exploring themes of displacement and belonging. And we have Rainzy Cruz, a poet of Sri Lankan origin, who captures the immigrant experience with deep reflections on exile and adaptation. We have Ronington Mystery, who has written A Fine Balance, Such a Long Journey, who writes about the Parsi community and the socio political realities of India, often with a diasporic lens. We have also Uma Parmeshwaram, who has written What Was Always Hers, who is also known for her poetry and fiction portraying the South Asian immigrant experience in Canada. So, diaspora, let's begin with what does exactly diaspora refers to. Diaspora refers to the dispersion or migration of people from their original homeland to different parts of the world while maintaining connections, can be cultural, can be emotional, can be historical with a place of origin. In literature, diasporic writing explored themes like identity, belonging, cultural hybridity, nostalgia, and adaptation in a foreign land. In the context of South Asian Canadian writing, diaspora often involves migration experiences, which can be voluntary, which can be forced, and also struggles with cultural duality. For example, balancing heritages with Canadian identity. There can also be some concepts like intergenerational conflicts, which emerge out of difference between immigrant parents and Canadian born children. And there can be also post colonial and historical connections, like, for example, memories of the homeland, colonial pasts, and political changes. Different South Asian Canadian writers portray diaspora in unique ways, influenced by their backgrounds, historical contexts, and personal experiences. For example, Michael Ondatse, who is a Sri Lankan Canadian writer, whose works are Running in the Family, The English Patient, and Anil's Ghosts. The diasporic themes include personal and historical memory of Sri Lanka, fragmented identity and a search for belongingness, and blending fiction with autobiography to reconstruct a lost homeland. Now, there can be other writers also, for example, Rain Zekush, who's a Sri Lankan Canadian writer. Works like The Springs of Fire, The Time We Were, includes diasporic themes, nostalgia, and longing for Sri Lanka. There can also be some struggles of immigrants seen adapting to Canadian life in their works. The poetic voice reflecting exile and cultural displacement. There is Rohinton Mistry, which is an again Indian Canadian writer. Works like Such a Long Journey, A Fine Balance, and Family Matters. These are some of the works. The diasporic themes, for example, focus on Parsi identity, both in India as an immigrants. There can be political and historical turbulence of India seen from afar in the writings, and there are questions of belongingness and cultural retention in the diaspora. We have one more writer, Uma Parmeshwaram, who is an again Indian Canadian writer, whose works are like What Was Always Hers and Mangoes on the Maple Tree. There are diasporic themes, for example, everyday life of South Asian immigrants in Canada and challenges of racism, generational gaps, and cultural adaptation found. There are strong female protagonists navigating identity and belongingness in the work. Now, each of these writers approach diaspora differently. For example, Ondatse through fragmented memory, Krush through poetry, Mistry through historical fiction, and Parmeswaram through social realism. Let's understand diaspora in general and or a brief introduction. The term diaspora originates from the Greek word diaspero, which means to scatter. Traditionally, it referred to the forced dispersal of people, such as the Jewish diaspora, but today it broadly applies to any group that has migrated from its homeland while maintaining cultural, emotional, or historical ties to their place of origin. Types of diaspora can emerge from various reasons. For example, historical diaspora, that are the forced displacement during war, colonization, and persecution. For example, Jewish, Armenian, and African diasporas. There can be labor diaspora, for example, migration of economic opportunities, like India and Filipino diasporas. There can be political diaspora, for example, exile due to political conflict or oppression, like Tibet from Afghan or Rohingya diasporas. There can be trade diasporas as well. For example, movement of merchants for business and commerce, like Chinese and Lebanese diasporas. So, some of the key characteristics of diaspora include migration and settlement. Diasporic communities often settle in new countries while preserving aspects of their original culture. There can be cultural hybridity, a blending of homeland traditions with those of the new environment. There can be collective identity, a shared sense of belonging that transcends geographic boundaries. There can be nostalgia and memory, a strong emotional and symbolic connection to the homeland. There can be challenges of belongingness, navigating issues of identity, assimilation, discrimination, and intergenerational conflicts. Diaspora in literature, music, and films often explore themes of homes, identity, displacement, and adaptation. Writers like Chinua Achebe, that is African diaspora, Salman Rushdie, Indian diaspora, and Michael Ondatse, Sri Lankan diaspora, depict the struggles and complexities of diasporic existence. In a globalized world, diasporas play a crucial role in shaping multicultural societies, influencing politics, and driving transnational economic and cultural exchanges. So, this was a bit about diaspora in general, or a brief introduction. Now, we move ahead to diasporic criticism. So, Desh Mishra is a critic who has tried to go into the way diaspora criticism um, a genre of theoretical writings marks itself off as a domain by concerning itself with the entity called diaspora. So this Mishra uses the classical diasporic groups, for example, the Jews and the Americans, as a point of departure, and then argues that diasporist's attempt to account for the mass dispersal of various ethnic collectives in the time of late modernity. Special alteration is given to the hybrid identity formations, multiple identifications, and double consciousness. Mishra has an essay called Diaspora Criticism in Julian Wolfres edition 21st Century Criticism. Mishra tells us that the term diaspora was used to designate specific social formations that are exemplary communities of transnational communities. This is used. This use is attributed to Kachik Toloyan, one of the founding editors of the multidisciplinary journal Diaspora, whose inaugural issue was 1991. Toloyan refers to the term in that way on page 5 of that issue. On page 22 of the book, 21st Century Criticism, Sudesh Mishra states one of the persistent dilemmas confronting diasporic criticism is how to configure diasporic subjectivity as hybrid, liminal, border, and hyphenated without recourse to the strategy of consigning non diasporic groups of imagery, domains of non liminability, and so on. Now, diasporic criticism is a branch of literary and cultural studies that examines the experiences, narratives, and cultural productions of diasporic communities. It analyzes how displacement, migration, and transnationalism shape identity, belonging, and cultural expression. The key themes in diasporic criticism, displacement, and migration, uh, whether it was displacement and migration, whether it was hybridity and cultural identity, whether it was nostalgia and memory, whether it was home and belongingness, whether it was post colonial and global perspective. Many diasporic texts address colonial histories and their impact on migration. Diaspora studies often intersect with post colonialism, globalization, and transnationalism. Sudesh Mishra authored the essay Diaspora Criticism, which appears to be the first chapter in the anthology introducing criticism at the 21st century, edited by Julian Welfreys. And in Diaspora Criticism, Mishra examines the complexities of diasporic identities, focusing on themes such as dual territoriality, situational laterality, and archival specificity. He analyzes how displaced communities navigate their cultural identities amidst contemporary social, cultural, and economic pressures. For a more in depth exploration, Mishra expanded upon these ideas in his 2006 book, Diaspora Criticism, which also published by Edinburgh University Press. This work offers a comprehensive introduction to the field, serving both as a timely guide and a rigorous critic, and provides a framework for discussing displaced communities in a way that takes contemporary social, cultural, and economic pressures into account. Mishra's conclusion is as an interdisciplinary genre of theoretical writing devoted to issues relating to identity politics, migratory subjectivity, identifications, group taxonomy, and double consciousness. Diaspora criticism is at its strongest when investigating varieties of continuity and discontinuity that exist within and across the different diasporic formations, within and across their various cultural and aesthetic productions, and between one social formation and its cultural aesthetic effects. Critics like Victor Ramraj and Uma Parmeshwaram had tried to come to terms with diaspora and diasporic writing. Parmeshwaram, for example, states that her own destiny as a member of a diaspora is fraught with a variety of tensions. She also states that people who move away from their native countries not only occupy but also bequeath to subsequent generations a luminosity and uneasy pull between the cultures. For the post colonial writer, the phenomenon of exile and expatriation is quite complex. There is a cusp created by the intersection of the cultures, which is the expatriate space. The idea of home is of particular concern to most exiles or expatriates. Sometimes the subject of diasporic writing is the immigrant experience. Sometimes such writers take as their subject the life they have left behind. So, in conclusion, Canadian diasporic writings by writers hailing from South Asia is a very rich body of writing and has an important place in contemporary Canadian writing. Writers like Michael Ondaatje have given a new dimensions to expatriate writing in general. Postmodernism and globalization have both contributed to a state of affair where migrancy is seen as a part of human condition. Nostalgia and cultural memory play an important role in this regard. So let's discuss about the important questions. Some of the important questions are: diasporic criticism has come to have its own distinct identity in recent times. Comment. So diasporic criticism has evolved into a distinct and influential field within literary and cultural studies. While initially examined through post colonial and transnational lenses, it has now established its own theoretical framework addressing the unique experiences of displaced communities. Diasporic studies were historically intertwined with post colonialism and migration studies. However, in recent times, scholars like Sudesh Mishra have argued for a distinct identity, as diaspora is not just about colonial histories but also voluntary migrations, economic mobility, and global networks. Theorization of diaspora beyond post colonialism, which focuses on the effects of colonialization, while diaspora studies explores ongoing transnational connections. The concept of hybrid identities, which is the third space, representing the in between cultural identity of the diasporic subject, neither fully belonging to homeland nor to the host country. Diasporic literature, such as the works by Michael Ondaatje, Jhumpa Lahiri, and M.G. Vasanji, frequently explores this hybrid identity. The first generation immigrants may experience nostalgia and longing for the homeland, while later generations may feel more assimilated yet struggle with cultural authenticity. For example, in Rohinton Mistri's novel, the first generation immigrants hold on to their Indian heritage, while younger generation question their connection to it. Contemporary diasporic criticism examine how technology, digital media, and economic migration create new forms of connection beyond traditional national borders. Diasporic identities are fluid, shaped by global capitalism, digital culture, and hybrid belonging. So, some of the key contributions of diasporic criticism is Diaspora Criticism, written by Sudesh Mishra, that argue diaspora studies must address contemporary socio-economic and political realities rather than just colonial pasts. Diasporic criticism has emerged as a distinct field, moving beyond post-colonial frameworks to focus on transnationalism, hybridity, generational shifts, and globalization. By addressing contemporary issues such as digital diasporas, labor migrations, and intersectional identities, it continues to shape discussion on belonging, memory, and cultural transformation. There is one more question. What do you understand by the term diaspora, and how does the diasporic consciousness get reflected in writing in general? So, diasporic writings reflect the experience of migration, exile, displacement, and identity struggles of individuals and communities living away from their homeland. These works capture the complexities of belongingness, nostalgia, hybridity, cultural conflict, and transnational connections. Many diasporic writers portray a deep longing for their homeland. The past is often reconstructed through memory, oral traditions, and storytelling. Michael Ondatse, who blends fiction and memory to revisit his Sri Lankan roots, there is diasporic characters often struggle with dual identities, navigating between the cultures of their homeland and that of their adopted country. For example, Jhumpa Lahiri's The Namesake explores the identity crisis of second generation immigrants. Diasporic individuals exist in a third space, blending multiple cultural influences. For example, M.G. Vasanji's The In Between World of Bikram Lal, portraying the layered identity of an East African Indian diaspora. Many diasporic narratives highlight prejudice, alienation, and struggles for acceptance in foreign lands. Rohinton Mysteries, Such a Long Journey, captures how Parsi immigrants in Canada face discrimination. So, differences arise between first generation non immigrants who hold on to traditions and second generation individuals who seek assimilation. The same concept can be seen in Uma Parmeshwaram's Mangoes on the Maple Tree, explores how South Asian parents and children clash over values in Canada. There are some literary forms used in diasporic writing, for example, the autobiographical and semi autobiographical narratives, where writers often reflect on personal migration experiences. In the book The Shadow Lines by Amitav Ghosh, there is magic realism. Some authors blend reality with myth to depict fragmented identities. For example, in Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie, diasporic writing in globalized world with digital technology and social media, modern diasporic writers engage in virtual storytelling and online diasporic communities. Contemporary authors like Rupi Kaur use poetry to discuss South Asian immigrant experiences in Canada. So, in conclusion, diasporic writing serve as a powerful medium to express the pain of exile, the hope of integration, and the dynamic formation of cultural identity. It not only preserves cultural heritage but also reshapes global literature by introducing hybrid narratives, multilingual expressions, and transnational themes. So, here we are done with Unit 17, which talked about Canadian South Asian diasporic writing. This is Unit 17, and then we discuss about Unit 18. Take a break of 4 minutes, exactly 7:30. We start with Unit 18, and we discuss about on that day in particular. We talk about his life and works, and we also talk about the larger implications of on that day life and works in society, and especially the diasporic criticism. So, in the next 3 minutes, we start again. So let's begin with Unit 18. This is on that says life and works that we are going to focus on Unit 18. We're also going to uh, focus on the larger implications of Ondaatje's life and works. So the main objective of this short unit is to give you an idea roughly about Michael Ondaatje's life and works so that you understand the novel that we are going to refer to in the next unit, that is the English Patient, and then we'll try to understand it in a better perspective. So let's start with the life of Ondaatje. Michael Ondaatje, who was born in Colombo, Sri Lanka, on 12th September 1943. In 1954, he moved to London. He did his schooling there. 1962, he moved to Canada to live with his brother Christopher. He enrolled in Bishop University, Quebec. He married in 1964 and moved to Toronto. He finished the last year of his undergraduate degree at the University of Toronto. He became a Canadian citizen in 1966, but before that, he moved to Kingston, Ontario. There, he began his MA in English at the University of Toronto. In 1967, he completed his master's thesis and published his first collection of poems, Dainty Monsters. He also started teaching English at the University of Western Ontario in London, a part of the Canadian province of Ontario. 1971, Ondaatje accepted a teaching position in the Glendon College campus of Toronto's York University after choosing not to do the PhD thesis required to maintain his position at the University of Western Ontario job. During the summer of 1979, he taught at the University of Hawaii. The next year, he separated from his wife, began to live with the writer Linda Spalding. The literary journal Brick is the joint venture. So, this was a crisp view about the life and background. And now let's talk about the major themes in his work. Major themes in his work include memory and identity mostly. For example, in the book Running in the Family, he has emphasized on the personal and the historical memory shaping identity. Now, in the work English Patient that we are going to study, going to refer to, he has talked about the fragmented narratives using a non-linear storytelling method, blending past and present. He also speaks about diaspora and migration as his major themes in his work, which explore cultural hybridity and displacement. There is colonial and post colonial histories that examine imperialism, which impact the individuals. And there is war and trauma as the major themes in the psychological and the physical scars of conflict in the book Anil's Ghosts. English Patient 1992 that won the Booker Prize and was adapted into an Oscar winning film. It was set during World War II. It follows four characters in an Italian villa exploring love, war, and memory. Likewise, there are other um, novels. For example, in The Skin of the Lion, Anil Ghosts, David Astero, and Warlight. He has some poetry collection as well. The collected works of Billy the Kid. There's a trick with knife and I'm learning to do, handwriting, and other aspects. Ondaatje's writing is deeply cinematic, influenced by his interest in film and photography. So his style is poetic, fragmented, and richly descriptive, blending history and fiction. As an editor at Coach House Books, he has nurtured Canadian literary talent. A quick other classifications. of his work can be The Dainty Monsters, Rat Jelly, Elimination Dance, There's a Trick with a Knife I'm Learning to Do, Secular Love, The Man with Seven Toes, The Collected Works of the Billy the Kid, Running in the Family, In the Skin of a Lion, The English Patient, and Anil's Ghosts. Now, this poetry is specially attentive to unusual details and unexpected combinations. Ondadze's work, Coming Through Slaughter, is also a novel. The family section in Rajali closes with a poem, letter, and other worlds, which is a touching and sensitive account of a flamboyant life and solitary death of the poet's father. So these are some of the works of Ondadze. Now, what can be the larger implications of Ondadze's life and works? Ondadze is a Sri Lankan by birth and now a Canadian citizen, is a kind of international citizen like Pico Iyer. He is a globalized soul who feels most at home in Toronto, which is a multicultural city in every sense of the word. Lately, a whole new group of writers have started giving us writing which goes beyond national boundaries. The cultural logic of late capitalism and the world's becoming a kind of global village have given peoples a new sense of identity which is quite complex and fluid. Ondatse also likes to make his writings quite hybridized. He moves beyond limitations imposed by single genres. The poetic element in his writing is always quite strong. His life also had been unconventional and impulsive. So a new kind of writer figure is emerging. That is what people of that period of time used to call Ondatse's work to be. And Ondatse's life and works are quite representative in this regard. So if we can quickly jump to the questions. There are three questions in all. This is a very short unit. We quickly discuss with the questions and we are done with the class. So the first one is enumerate some of the interesting aspects of Michael Ondaatje's life. Some of the important, interesting aspects of Michael Ondaatje's life are it's a multicultural heritage. Ondaatje, since he was born in Sri Lanka to a Dutch Tamil Burgher family, spent his youth in England and later settled in Canada. Having a cinematic influence, he's having a strong interest in films and has worked on documentary projects. His writing style is hybrid, started as a poet, his prose remains highly lyrical, and his books mix history, memoir, poetry, and fiction, making them difficult to categorize. And there is personal family history at his work, for example, Running in the Family, which is a semi autobiographical memoir where he reconstructs his Sri Lankan family's past through memory, myth, and fiction. Ondaatje played a significant role in Canadian literature, working as an editor at Coach House Books and supporting emerging writers. Michael Ondaatje's book blend multiple genres, making them hybrid literary experiments, mixing poetry and prose. The collected works of Billy the Kid that combine poetry, photographs, newspapers, clippings, and prose, offering a fragmented but immersive portrait of the legendary outlaw. Running in the Family is a part of autobiography, part fiction, part travelogue, blending personal recollections with imagined history. English Patient and the Skin of a Lion mix historical accounts with surreal and poetic elements, making them more than traditional historical novels. Anil's Ghost reads like both a political thriller and a historical documentary, with elements of forensic investigation and lyrical prose. Ondaatje's refusal to stick to one literary form reflects his belief that storytelling should be fluid, open ended, and layered. Michael Ondaatje's works are deeply postmodern due to the following characteristics like non-linear narratives. His novels often jump between past and present using fragmented storytelling, for example, The English Patient, unreliable narrators and multiple perspectives. He challenges the idea of a single truth, allowing multiple voices to shape this story. In The English Patient, different characters offer conflicting memories of the past. His autobiographical novel, Running in the Family, contains exaggerations, contradictions, and invented moments, making the truth elusive, typical of postmodern literature. His works reference history, literature, film, and visual art, creating layers of meaning. In the Skin of a Lion alludes to classics like the Epic of Gilgamesh, focused on marginalized and forgotten voices instead of grand historical narratives. Ondaatje's focuses on immigrants, workers, and war survivors, making his novels anti-authoritarian and submersive. Ondaatje's life, general blending works and postmodern storytelling make him one of the most innovative contemporary writers. He challenges conventional forms, embraces ambiguity, and invites readers to engage with history, identity, and memory in a fluid, non linear way. Now, let's talk about let's talk about popular works. The English Patient, that would be your Unit 19. We'll be talking about it tomorrow. There are other works like In the Skin of a Lion, Anil Ghost, Running in the Family, and the collected works of Billy the Kid. If we are to compare between different kinds of work, we would come to notice that Michael Ondaatje's novels share common themes such as memory, identity, exile, and history, but they also differ in narrative style, setting, and genre experimentation. Genre-wise, The English Patient, which was written in 1992, is a historical fiction war novel. In the Skin of Lion, 1987, it's a historical novel, immigrant fiction. Anil Ghost's 2000, it's a political thriller, forensic mystery. And Running in the Family, it's 1982, which is a memoir and autofiction. If we talk about the aspect of setting, English Patient is a World War II era Italy and the North African desert. In The Skin of Lion, it's early 20th century Toronto. Anil's Ghost, it's civil war in Sri Lanka. Running in the Family, it's 1920s, 70s Sri Lanka. Discussing about the narrative style, it's The English Patient, non-linear fragmented perspectives. In the Skin of the Lion, non-linear episodic storytelling. Anil goes linear but interwoven, and Running in the Family, it blends fact, fiction, and myth. Themes in The English Patient talks about war, love, identity, memory, colonial history. In the Skin of Lion, it's immigrant struggles, historical erasure, labor, class conflict. In Anil Ghosh, it's political violence, human rights, and truth seeking. And it's Running in the Family, family history, nostalgia, unreliable memory. Protagonist, English Patient, the burned patient, that is Hannah, Kip, and Caravaggio. And in the Skin of Lion, it's Patrick Lewis, immigrant workers. Anil Ghosh, it's Anil Tissera, a forensic anthropologist. Running in the Family, the author's persona exploring family legacy. So, the English Patient and in the Skin of a Lion use fractured storytelling to mirror the way people remember history. Running in the Family plays with unreliable memory, exaggeration, and fantasy, making personal history ambiguous. So, Ondaatje's works share themes of exile, memory, and fragmented history, but each novel experiments with form, perspective, and genre. His postmodern approach challenges traditional storytelling, making his narratives immersive yet elusive. So we are done with both the units, Unit 17 and Unit 18, that covered diasporic writings, and also Unit 18 that covered Ondaatje's life and works. As a matter of fact, tomorrow we study Unit 19, that can be the English patient. We talk about the theme, structure, and characterization in Unit 19. And in Unit 20, we talk about the technique in English patient. So, both of these will be covered tomorrow. As of now, we are done with Unit 17 and 18. Thank you so much.